You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. My name is Troy Singer with Ring Digital, and I'm here with my good friend Bart Kaler of Kaler Solutions. And today, the topic of conversation is marketing a small college, thinking beyond the constraints. We have the opportunity to talk to Tom Kook, who is the Vice President for Enrollment and Marketing at Emmaus University in Dubuque, Iowa. With almost 2 decades of leadership in higher education, Tom has built a career focused on helping small, mission-fit-driven colleges thrive through creativity, collaboration, and data-informed decision-making. His experience spans enrollment management, digital strategy, and student success roles at institutions like Upper Iowa University, Ashford University, and Southern New Hampshire University.
Yeah, Tom's great. I really have known Tom for several years now, and I really love how he's leading the efforts to really help reimagine how they do marketing at Emmaus, which is a small school, and I work with a lot of different small schools, and so just being able to have that conversation today on the podcast was extremely rewarding for me. I think a lot of people, see small schools and it's like, well, how can they compete in such a crowded higher ed market space? But I think that really Tom talks a lot about leveraging that authenticity, the storytelling, leaning into your mission, coming up with those innovative resources and strategies. I really like that, and he tries to do it all on a modest budget, which I think everybody should, their ears should perk up and say, oh, let's talk about that. So it's a great episode, and I'm really happy to share it.
Yes, the familiarity and the experience between you two was wonderful to hear, and I was sitting back like I was a first-time listener. So without keeping this away from our listeners any longer, here is our conversation with Tom Kook. Tom, we always start by asking our guests to share something interesting that they've recently learned or read. So you are in the spotlight now.
Yeah, this is more of an experience, not related to higher education in any way, but this past weekend, my wife and I had the opportunity to go to Chicago and watch a family member run in the Chicago Marathon. That's 26.2 miles through the streets of downtown Chicago. And our daughter had been in cross country in high school, so we knew what it was like to watch a race, right? So we knew that there was some running and walking and some steps involved. So we decided to track our steps during that while we were watching it. So I set my Runkeeper app just to see how far we would actually walk during the marathon. 12 miles. Wow. We ended up covering 12 miles so almost a half marathon of our own. But it was worth it. It was fun. We got to see our family member 5 times on the course. I tried to get a medal at the end for my half marathon that I completed. But they wouldn't let me. But so I guess my advice to the listeners, if you ever decide to go to Chicago to watch a marathon, highly recommend it. Just make sure you wear comfortable shoes.
That's great.
Love it. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I think I'm big time when I walk a golf course and it's 7 miles, but I have some big shoes to fill when it comes to that. And
I wasn't prepared for the full 12 miles though at all.
No, I wouldn't be either.
I love our first topic that we are set to discuss with you, which is thinking small and marketing big. Now, smaller institutions often fight that perception that small means limited. So how have you turned the size of Emmaus into a strategic advantage, not a constraint, in your marketing and enrollment approach?
Yeah, I love this question. First, being small really allows us, I think, to clearly define who we are to our prospective students. As you know, your strategic advantage is that unique characteristic that sets you apart from the other schools in a positive way. So for us, I don't think size is that characteristic, but I think our size certainly allows us to do what we do very well. I think that kind of leads to our strategic advantage. So being small allows us to be a lot more relational in our recruiting. As an institution, when our students get on campus, being small allows us to really personalize everything that our enrollment team does, from our conversations to the student experience when they come visit us on campus. One of the nice things about leading the marketing and enrollment efforts for a small college is that I really know that we're not the right fit for everyone. I think there's some freedom in that. I often tell my teams, they've probably heard me say it too many times, but we're not the right fit for everyone, but we are the perfect fit for some. And then it's our job to make sure that we put our name and our brand in front of those people that we're the perfect fit for. Here's a pretty good example, I think, from my own personal experience, actually. My oldest daughter, the cross-country runner, she chose to come to Emmaus before I was in my current role. So I was teaching a night class at Emmaus and as an adjunct faculty, and she actually chose to come to Emmaus to earn her degree in counseling psychology and biblical studies. Being a small school for her allowed her to kind of step out of her comfort zone a little bit with little risk. She was a little bit more reserved and a little bit anxious heading into college, and the size of Emmaus really allowed her to find kind of her people and her place in the college. And she was able to really get involved on campus. She was a chaplain her sophomore year. She was an RA her junior year. She met her husband and got married after her senior year, which was, we're all excited about that. And honestly, seeing the growth in her, both personally and spiritually, is really what drew me to full-time at Emmaus when my current role opened up. But my second daughter, on the other hand, was looking for something completely different, and that was okay. She chose to go to a larger Christian university, and we subsequently wrote her out of our will. Of course we didn't, but we were happy for her, right? We were happy for her that she was able to find her place and she was able to learn and grow in her own environment. And honestly, though, the size of the school doesn't define the impact that you're able to have. How clear you are on your mission and who you are as a university is really what determines your ability to have an impact.
I think that's great. And I love the fact that those two stories you just told there, I think, are really indicative of what small schools can do. I mean, I wrote it in my book. It's too often that we hear schools say, well, we're small. We've got a 10-to-1 faculty student ratio. Our faculty are like mentors, blah, 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 blah. It all sounds the same. And I think that really what the important thing is those stories. And those stories, while everything I just said could be true of you compared to a large flagship state institution, if you will. But you also have stories that are not only about small, but also very distinct and emotionally. They resonate more with those things. And so how do you actually, make sure that those stories that you tell are really emotionally resonating with those students, like your oldest daughter who is that mission fit, to make sure that they understand that?
Yeah, you're probably going to hear me say this often throughout the interview, but it really comes back to our mission. Yeah. Our mission, and I'll just tell you our mission. Our mission is to glorify God by educating and equipping learners to impact the world for Christ through faithful and effective service in their ministries, professions, and their communities. So that kind of tells you where we're coming from. Yeah. And we like to use stories that support our mission. Not the latest fad or the latest trend in social media or in marketing. We have to find a balance between being relevant, of course, and being on mission. Relevance is important, but not certainly at the expense of who we are as a university. So we're looking for we aren't looking for stories that are necessarily those polished marketing pieces, but more so glimpses into like authentic relationships and mentorship happening between faculty, staff, and students, and how that prepares our graduates to be successful as they go out and faithfully serve wherever the Lord takes them after they leave Emmaus.
That's great. And I love how you're kind of describing that, because I think that's one of the challenges that, I've heard a lot of VPs at other small colleges say, we just can't compete against the big schools. And they just kind of dismiss it. And they just try to, they have this defeatist attitude sometimes. And I challenge that, just kind of like what you just said there too. And so I think starting with your mission is a great thing. But what do you say when you hear somebody say that? I mean, what's the first mindset shift that you would encourage them to do, or maybe that first practical step that you think that you'd challenge them to make if they have that thought?
Yeah, I don't want to say that we aren't competing against the big schools, because in a literal sense we do, right? They enroll students that could enroll at Emmaus University. That's
a really good point.
I think the best way to answer this question is that we don't compete in the same way as the bigger schools do. Our competitive advantage is way different than their competitive advantage, right? They're not using the same messaging. They're not telling the same stories in the same way that we are. We have to be clear on who we are and what we have to offer, but also on who we aren't. I think that's an important distinction. I was at a college fair about a month ago, and I was talking to a high school student, and I asked her, as I often do, what are you looking for in a college? And she replied to me, she goes, about $15,000. And it took me a few seconds. I'm like, are you talking like tuition dollars, like $15,000? But then I go, are you thinking students? And she goes, yeah. So I knew right then that there was little point in me trying to convince her that Emmaus was going to be the right place for her. A student looking for 15,000 classmates, that a smaller, intimate college experience like Emmaus probably isn't going to be the right fit for that particular student. So it goes back to that saying, we're not the right fit for everyone. We don't have to be everything to all people. And that's the value of being small and being a mission-driven university like we are. We're called to be good stewards of the things that God's given us, and we just try to do that the best that we can.
Yeah, that Goldilocks effect of being not too big, not too small is relative for a lot of students. And so I really appreciate the fact that you were honest with that young woman and said, that's who we are. This is who we are. And I think that it'd be great if more and more schools would actually do that at college fairs, to say, you want to go talk to them over there. So
yeah, and that's right. And we knowing who's around you, I do try to make some recommendations at times when I know that we're not going to be the right fit for. And it doesn't do any of us good. It wastes our marketing dollars. It wastes their time, and it clutters their inbox. And there's no sense in hanging on to the student when you know that we're not the right fit for them.
Yeah, that's great.
Tom, we now would like to ask you about being innovative on a budget. Every small school has resource constraints, and when everything feels urgent, how do you decide where to invest limited time, money, and staff?
Yeah, I really felt that question. You hear the phrase "the tyranny of the urgent" thrown around in higher education all the time, and I feel like in my world, and probably in your world as well, everything seems urgent. So where is the tyranny when everything's urgent, right? I think it comes down to the old Stephen Covey quote: "Keeping the main thing the main thing." For us, as I've mentioned, the main thing is our mission, but it's also I'd be remiss if I didn't say it's also important for us to find a return on investment, right? No margin, no mission in business acumen. But so we have to find what are the things that we are doing that are going to drive inquiries, applications, and ultimately enrollments. I think first and foremost, you have to have good data. I found that out when I first came on board at Emmaus, holding on to some projections that I thought we were going to have, but data was inaccurate, and it really came back to burn me in the end. And I think that's a must for any institution, but for smaller institutions, I think that importance is almost magnified, because you're talking about smaller margins with the smaller institutions. So wrong decisions seem to be more costly, at least from a percentage of budget perspective. So you really have to be confident in the data that you have, and you have to be able to make decisions from accurate data. I think also, in addition to correct data, you have to learn how to say no. That's something that took me a little bit of time, but and I have an admissions teams who are full of wanderers. And their director, if you've ever met him, he is a wanderer with a capital W. So I love that. One thing about my team is that they're constantly thinking about how we can make it better. It's one of our core values as a team, and they are always coming to me with ideas of how we can make things better. However, as a leader, learning to hit pause, learning to think it through and kind of compare the big picture, and then you have to discern whether the answer is a yes, or if it's a not now, or maybe sometimes a no, is very important. Yeah, it's not about doing more or doing less. It's about doing what matters the most.
Yeah, I like that approach, because I think that too many times we get focused on the tactical before we step back, either look at strategic, either from strategic on how are we going to organize this, or strategic in the way that we're going to do our marketing. But I know that sometimes, I was recently at a group that we are members of together with ABHE, and had a chance to visit with Luke, who's on your team. And part of what I present, and the reason I get so excited about schools like Emmaus, and I do a lot of work with smaller institutions, is this scrappy attitude, this idea of trying to do some unconventional marketing experiments that might make a big result. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you just can't buy more names. I mean, buying names sometimes is a way out for some schools, and it's kind of the traditional way of doing things. But help me understand, are there any scrappy or unconventional things that you guys have done that created some momentum that it didn't require a huge spend that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, I'm not sure if scrappy is certainly the right adjective, and it certainly wasn't original or unique. But one of the things that we've done in the past 3 years is to really try to lean on our student body for content and lead generation. I remember actually it was the same conference that you met Luke at a couple weeks ago, but several years ago, or a few years ago anyway. I was there, and one of the presenters talked about how he essentially staffed his content marketing team with students.
Yeah.
He hired them, he trained them well, and then he let them create. We haven't taken it necessarily to that level, but we've found ways to utilize some of our most engaged students in both marketing and enrollment in a way that's helped us to create momentum on our social media channels, and especially in some of our recruiting events. One area that we've done this is with our summer camp recruiting. In the summer, our admissions teams, as you know, in higher education, they're busy completing the recruiting class. They're working on anti-melt as much as they possibly can. So their summers are busy. However, historically, summer camps have been a really effective recruiting grounds for us as a small faith-based institution. So we found that many of our current students were spending their summers serving at a lot of the camps that we were drawing students from. So we decided to provide those students with a little bit of financial incentive. We gave them some training, high-level admissions counselor training. We send them off to camp that they were already going to, and we'd give them a box of swag or merch or whatever the kids are calling it now. And those students actually become ambassadors for Emmaus throughout the summer at these various high school camps. And what it allows us to do, allows us to multiply our summer camp efforts in a way that it's been extremely effective in generating mission fit leads in a way that doesn't break our travel budget.
I love that, and I think that's. I mean, those are some good ideas. I'm just going to speak to the audience for a second. Figure out ways that are going to be innovative and creative. And again, I like the fact that Tom didn't say it's not necessarily scrappy, but it's looking at what are the resources I have and how can I use them creatively. And that doesn't take a lot of effort. It just takes intentionality. And so, but I also recognize too that a lot of people that are listening, and this also includes your portfolio, Tom, is the fact that you also are doing online and adult education. You talked about being an adjunct in some of the programs earlier. So those are spaces that we have to innovate constantly to stay relevant as well. So how have those experiences in online and adult kind of shaped the way that you're doing your marketing and your enrollment strategy today? I mean, I'm thinking both for trad ed and non-traditional students.
Yeah, I love that question. Adult learners have a soft spot in my heart in the higher education space. It's really where I got my start. and it's what got me into higher education. And I really fell in love with higher education when I was working as an academic advisor, primarily working with adult learners. And it seems miles away from what I do right now as the chief marketing and admissions officer at a small faith-based university. But what I learned from those experiences that's really shaped who I am as a professional today is about relationships and building trust, particularly on the building trust side. In my previous roles, those that I found were the most successful were the ones who were able to build relationships with their students, even from a distance, and they did it by gaining their trust. Trust that they would do what they said they would do, and trust by being really authentic in about what they were promoting. It doesn't do anyone any good to be inauthentic, right? If we're going to convince a student to come to Emmaus by falsely promoting who we are or what we have to offer, we hurt both the student and our own reputation in the long run.
Right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and I think there's a lot of ways to do that. So talk about some of the tools. I mean, before we get on, I mean, we were talking about budgets. We're talking about small budgets. I know there's a ton of different tools out there. There's automation, there's analytics, there's CRMs, there's whatever. There's also AI. So how do you guys figure out what to evaluate and what's with your time and what's just noise or what's like, you know what, we've been down that road, or because people are always looking for that silver bullet, and spoiler alert, the silver bullet doesn't exist. Yeah. So let's talk about how do you kind of assess all these new things that come up and how to really make decisions.
Yeah, that's there are so many out there. In fact, I think I would say during we started this podcast, I probably received a dozen solicitations in my inbox just from other vendors trying to sell me something. And I don't know that I'm exaggerating there, but I remember a few years ago, I was very interested in predictive analytics, something I'd brought kind of with me from my days in adult education and online learning. There's a lot of tools that are out there to help you prioritize your team's time. I connected with a few companies at a couple different vendor fairs, and I had narrowed it down to a few, and I met with them virtually, and I chose one, and I went further with them in the process to the point where they gave me a quote. And I was really happy with what they had to offer. And I knew that would be a benefit to my team, but it was really expensive.
Yeah.
So I went to my. I was convinced it would help us do what we needed to do, but I was unsure about the price tag. So I went to my president for a little bit of advice, and I've used this advice over and over again when evaluating big decisions like this. He wasn't opposed to the idea, even with the spend. He was willing to advocate for me with our CFO on the budget. But he asked me this. He goes, if those were the last dollars that you had to spend, is that where you would want to put the money to make a difference? And that question has really kind of sat with me over the last few years. And it's really kind of ultimately in that case, the answer was no. I went back and I thought about it. I'm like, no, it's not where I want to spend my last dollar. If those were my last dollars to spend, that's not where I would want it to be. So I didn't move forward with them, even though I really believed in the impact. I thought that maybe I could use the money better somewhere else. He was really asking me to look at the opportunity cost of that purchase, right? And what am I giving up essentially to make that big investment? And sometimes the answer is yes, right? And sometimes you move forward with it. In fact, we're in the process of changing CRMs right now. One that's going to help us improve our communication flow and how we track and interact with our prospective students. And in reality, I might not have been able to make that purchase had I said yes 2 years earlier to predictive analytics. And I think that this our new CRM is going to make an even bigger impact for us. We don't need every tool. We just need to find the right tools that are and use them well.
Yeah, I love that. Both of those, I think, are really good. Would you spend it on if it was the last dollars you had, and figure out which tools are going to be the right tools and not just whatever looks like it could work. That's great.
Tom, we would now like to look to the future of small college marketing. And as you know, we are in an age of digital transformation, but with a personal touch. What does that look like in actual practice, and how do you preserve the human connection that defines a small college experience?
Yeah, that personal touch is so important, especially for a small college like Emmaus. Students who are considering a small college are likely doing so because they crave that personal connection. I think that's one of the points that draw them to a school like us. So what we're looking for are ways to take advantage of the tools that are at our disposal, but in a way that allows us to really enhance that human connection. So, for example, using a texting service to send out a mass text through the texting app, but having an admissions counselor or a student ambassador who's available in real time to respond personally to those return text messages, or reporting from our CRM to identify students who started an application but never finished, and then giving them that personal phone call, that personal outreach, or sending them a handwritten note to try to encourage them to continue. But using the digital tools to help us reach more students, but to try to find ways to do it in a personal way.
I like that, because that's one of the things that we talk a lot about, not only with the digital tools, but also with AI, is just how do we actually use these tools to buy us more time to spend time in personal relationships, because I think that's the end of the goal is how do we do that. And so with all of those tools, with AI, higher ed's shifting fast. And so what do you see the biggest external forces that's going to really reshape how you do these small colleges, and how are they going to market themselves over the next 5 years? Because I mean, I have my thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think about how these external forces are going to shape things.
Yeah, well, I would love to say the demographic cliff, but after listening to your previous guest, I'm feeling a little convicted about that. Honestly, though, I think that the demographic cliff is going to impact our industry in a major way. There's no way around it. But I think your previous guest, Dr. Caridi, was right. We can't use the demographic cliff as an excuse.
Yep.
Industry experts have been talking about it for years. They've seen it coming. They've been talking about it. We've been planning for it. And I firmly believe that the schools, especially the small schools who have the best understanding of who they are and perhaps of who they aren't, are the ones who are going to have the greatest opportunity. They're going to thrive the most in the coming years, probably survive the demographic cliff the best. Mission clarity will rise above marketing trends, I think. I think I want to put that on a sign in my office or a bumper sticker. Yep. But the schools who clearly articulate why they exist is in a way that resonates with their target audience are the ones that are going to stand out the most. But here's where I think our job is going to get a little bit more challenging, where I see the enrollment cliff having the biggest impact. Historically, faith-based colleges and universities have been able to recruit kind of in our own ponds or in our own watering holes, I think is the phrase that you use. And we've been able to do that largely uninterrupted. And I'm talking about private Christian high schools, homeschool networks, and the like. We've been there kind of on our own, recruiting those students without a lot of competition from those schools. Even with the decline in high school graduates, those markets are growing right now in a lot of areas of the country. Iowa being one of them. We're seeing a spike in homeschool families. We're seeing a spike in private Christian high schools. So what I suspect is going to happen, and I'm sure we're going to begin to see more and more of the state schools and those larger private colleges and universities begin to target some of those growing markets. So I think we're going to start to see more competition in those areas that we've been largely left alone. Just another reason why I think it's important, critical even, that we're able to both articulate our mission and demonstrate it in a meaningful and tangible way.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a skill set that articulation, I think, is going to be one of the skills that marketers need to lean in really, really well into this next. And you're right, that's kind of the way I map it out in the book. And those watering holes are going to be critical. But you're right, there are going to be more animals at that watering hole. And how are we going to deal with that? And so, what do you think, in addition to that articulation skill, what do you think are some of the other skills that marketers, especially for small privates, are going to need to do that's really going to separate the good from the great?
Yeah, that question automatically makes me think of Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And in the book, he describes greatness as sustained excellence in performance. So looking at not just short-term success, but how do you sustain that excellence? So to answer your question, I'm actually going to steal a line from one of your presentations here, Bart. But that author, I think it's Alvin Toffler, says that to the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read or write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and then relearn. I love that quote. I've taken pictures of it a couple times in some of your presentations. I've sent it to myself, so I always have it available. I think that concept applies in so many ways, and I think it really applies here to this question. The next generation of higher education marketers, or even marketers in general, aren't going to be those. They're going to be those who are willing and able to change on the fly, right? I've been teaching principles of marketing at Emmaus since 2017. I have an entire unit on digital marketing that now includes AI tools, right? That didn't even exist starting back in 2017. I used to start my course, like night one, first hour, telling these students that the principles of marketing that I learned back in 1997, so I'm dating myself a little bit, but that principles of marketing is drastically different than the principles of marketing that I was teaching them in 2017 or 2020. Now that I have to change that, the marketing that I've taught 5 years ago is dramatically different than the marketing that I'm teaching them today. Of course, the big principles, right? The 4 Ps, 5 if you include people, those are still the same. Those aren't going anywhere, but the tools and techniques on how you interact with the product and the price and the place and the promotion is changing faster than McGraw-Hill can put out a textbook. So I think the next generation of higher ed marketers, they need to be comfortable with experimenting. And I think that leaders in marketing need to be willing to create a space where failing is acceptable as long as you're able to learn from it. I think that curiosity and adaptability and a growth mindset are going to need to be the core traits if you want to go from being good to great.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that idea of failing forward and agility and just being willing to be okay with that. And that's what I love so much about that quote, is the idea that we're going to have to continue to adapt. We're going to continue to hone. And I agree with you. I think those skills are the ones that people really need to lean into and understand the most. So excellent.
Tom, if we could ask you for one final piece of advice for marketing and enrollment leaders at small colleges facing big challenges, what would it be?
Yeah, I think to narrow it down to one piece of advice is really to lean into your mission. Be authentic with who you are. Identify your ideal students, find out where they're gathering, and then find ways to be there. Have a clear value proposition, like why would someone choose your school over another school?
Wonderful.
Love that.
Everyone, we've been talking to Tom Kook, Vice President for Enrollment and Marketing at Emmaus University. Tom, for those that would like to contact you after hearing this episode, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, I think I'm on LinkedIn, probably the best way. It's Tom Kook with a K, Kook. Also, I love coffee and good food, so if you're coming through Dubuque at any time, or if we are at a conference together, I'd love to buy you coffee or grab lunch with you somewhere.
That is wonderful. And thank you, Tom, for everything that you've shared with us today on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bart, do you have final thoughts that you would like to share before we wind our episode up?
Yeah, I really like what Tom said today. And Tom, thanks so much for joining us. Tom and I have known each other for a while, and it's such a privilege to just be able to have him as a guest on this. And I really like a lot of what he said, because it fits so closely to what I've really been teaching and talking to a lot of people about. And so just this idea of really being able to articulate who you are, being able to lean into that and live into that, and then go after the students that are going to be wanting that. I mean, it sounds simple. It is to a degree, but it's not. Yeah. And so, but you've got to take some time. It takes intentionality. I think the days of holding out a catcher's mitt and just waiting for students to enroll are over. We have to do work, and it takes effort. It takes some strategy, and it takes some intentionality. And so I just am really grateful for what Tom shared today. And if you want to learn more about that, let me know. Check out my book. This isn't really not supposed to be a plug, but a lot of what we talked about today is in the book. And so I think you might enjoy that as well. So Tom, thanks again. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Bart. Thank you, Troy.
And to our audience, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Higher Ed Marketer. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with a colleague and follow us on LinkedIn at The Higher Ed Marketer. The podcast is brought to you by Kaler Solutions, your trusted partner in higher ed branding, enrollment strategy, and mission fit marketing. We'll see you next week for another great conversation on the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast.
The Higher Ed Marketer Podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.